How did you find it? All right. Okay, so now interestingly, the FDA have approved several licensed drugs for anxiety that have been made from lavender constituents, likewise the Medicines Controls Board in England, and these are taken orally. But for the purposes of aromatherapy though, it would be adequate to use the lavender topically and through inhalation. So in 1992, there was a great experiment done by a man called Jaeger and his team, where they demonstrated that if you put lavender onto the skin and you massaged it in, after 9 minutes, you could find traces of the lavender in the blood plasma. Now we can see medicinal usage in Unani medicine, that's medieval Greco-Arabic medicine, who were really the pioneers of aromatherapy. They were the ones that really started to use essential oils in the ways that we use them now. And their usage of lavender can be seen as early as the 10th century, when Avicenna, he was one of the earliest writers that we've got, he suggests it for epilepsy and for migraine, and animal experiments these days back up those ancient ideas that lavender reduces anxiety, that it is a sedative, that it's analgesic, and yeah, anticonvulsant too, but we'll look at that in a minute, but importantly, antidepressant. So, considering what I said about it being ruled by Mercury, there's very interesting connections with this communication and lightness of thought. In 2006, it was established that lavender had anti-conflict properties, and that's phenomenal. I don't even understand why they really tested it, to be honest, but they were able to say that it was this constituent linalool that we talked about earlier that did the job, and that it would make it a very good mediator, an oil for mediation. And this trial always really makes me smile, because way back in the 80s, when my mum was using essential oils on us, and potentially, yeah, she would have been qualified by then, I think, but she used to burn lavender in an evaporator to stop my sister and I squabbling. So 1980s, so what were you, 30 years later it took for them to actually establish that it was true, but it certainly can't, well, you needed something in our house to stop us arguing, and it's still the same now. So incidentally, going back to the 1980s, to the time of my enormous shoulder pads and beautiful back-combed hair, I must tell you about the lavender oil I had on my chin. And when I say lavender oil, I mean the bottle of lavender oil. I used to walk around with it like this. And this was because I had an overwhelming hatred of one zit. Just one. I only had one. My poor sister was blighted by acne. She used to go swimming all the time. She was a fantastic swimmer, and it really aggravated her acne. So she and Mum were just always trying to get rid of the acne. But I only had this one spot, and I was a sixth former. There's always a sixth form boy in there, and I was absolutely determined that he wouldn't be put off by this spot. I'm sure it probably was the bottle that put him off in the end, to be honest, but there we go. Now, the reason why I say that is two reasons. Firstly, yes, teenage spots, this is the deal. This is absolutely the deal. But in the olden days, we were used to whack it on. You know, we wouldn't think twice about using it neat. But now we know more about skin sensitization, and we know that for some people it can cause irritation, and it can cause the skin to become sensitized to essential oils and to particular essential oils. And I will say, using too much lavender does make me sensitized in terms of headaches. I get headaches, so I would say don't use too much of them at all for anything. But yeah, there's no mark, is there? I haven't damaged my skin, but you know, dilute it, pop it in a moisturizer, just a couple of drops, and we'll learn how to do that later on in the course. But yes, teenage spots, memories, the things that we did. But actually, memories figure very, very highly in essential oil research. As you can imagine, every researcher either wants to find a cure for cancer, for diabetes, definitely for diabetes, but also for Alzheimer's. So we see an awful lot of essential oil research into memories, particularly with lavender. So usually with rats. I'm glad it's not people in this case, but I am sad for the rats. These poor rats had, on this occasion, Alzheimer's induced, bless them. And they were put into a maze. Now, they were testing what's called their spatial memory. So if a person were losing their spatial memory, they would start to lose ideas of their environment. Suddenly they keep getting lost. They wouldn't recognise the house anymore. Couldn't find their way around the bedroom. Probably don't remember where they've left things, that kind of things. So these poor mice were then given some lavender to inhale over a period of time. And you know what? Their spatial memory came back. They were able to find their way around the maze. They were going back to the strategies that they'd learned before the Alzheimer's was induced, and they remembered where they were and how to get to their food, etc. That's fantastic, isn't it? So it's very interesting. What I will point out at this stage is these are trials on rats. For whatever reason, the medicine hasn't found its way to being the essential oil research hasn't found its way to being a medicine. Sometimes that can be because it hasn't gone to clinical trial yet. Sometimes what they've done is they've tried to do it to put the essential oil with blood plasma in a tea tree, into a petri dish, but the blood has started to bubble up and it ruins the blood plasma. And so we know that actually in the blood this won't quite work the same way. So don't think immediately, wow, this is going to be helped with somebody's spatial memory. However, don't also think, well, I'm not going to try it then. You know, if you've got somebody in your family who's really struggling with this and Alzheimer's, give it a go. You don't need to necessarily be putting it on the skin. We can be using inhalation. And later on in this lesson, I'll talk about how to do the inhalation side of things. Okay. So, another trial with the poor old rats. They'd been exposed to lavender and they were found that they went to sleep faster and they slept longer. So that's interesting. I really don't understand why that wasn't done on people, to be honest. Why didn't they do that on people? But there we go. But so we know that it would potentially help insomnia. And actually, if you talk to an aromatherapist, just like me, I will say, yeah, it'll definitely help insomnia. We don't necessarily need to wait for clinical data to be able to back up these informations. Now, in 2011, almost 1,000 years after Avicenna originally made his assertion that lavender would help epilepsy, they tested it. And the trial showed that the lavender inhibited the onset of the epileptic seizure, so it took longer for it to start. The duration of the seizure was shortened and also it was weakened. So it took longer for one to happen. When it did, it was shorter and it was not as strong as it would normally be. Now, what we can't say is that the lavender stopped the epilepsy. What we can say is that this was a short trial, and we know from other research that aromatherapy is cumulative, in that essential oils need to be used over a period of time, and as you use them, their effects become stronger and more effective. So don't try things for a couple of days and then think this isn't working. It will take some time. You'll see small immediate effects, but the longer you use them, the better the effects that you're going to have. Trials in 1999 and 2010 both led us to the conclusion that simple inhalation is enough to be able to bring about these effects. And we know that the lavender affects the amygdala and the hippocampus. Now we'll talk about those more in the limbic system lesson, but when you come into your slides in this section, read the slides well and have a look at the pictures. There's some really interesting EEG analysis, particularly somebody who's showing empathy, and that's very interesting. Now, in a 1998 paper in the International Journal of Neuroscience, it was described how you see lavender affect an EEG. So it's thought that if you increase alpha waves and theta waves, this brings about relaxation. I always think it's very, very strange that we can put a man on the moon, or we can have a nano iPod nano thing with tiny little thing with all these songs on, but the science is fantastic, yet we still know very little about the brain. But we think that if you reduce alpha and theta rates, it brings about relaxation. So inhalation at 10% by the researchers, and incidentally these trials always use dilations far higher than we would as an aromatherapist, and we'll look at that more when we get to the dilutions lesson, but they use 10% here. 10% for 3 minutes saw the alpha power increasing, that they found that the people who were being tested had decreased anxiety, and every one of them showed an improvement in mood, and this was quite a large trial. It was 40 people. Then in the next trial, 20 participants, again 10% dilution, alpha and theta were all improved in the participants when they looked on the EEG in every single part of the brain. Now when you come to do the limbic system, you'll see why that's really, really interesting. But activation has been particularly observed in a part of the brain called the cingulate gyrus. Now, it's still not very clear what this part of the brain actually does, but we think it's to do with higher cognitive processing, but also personality. So that's very interesting from the point of view of conflict, isn't it? If it's affecting this part of the brain, how is it affecting their personality? Interesting. Now, arresting EEG asymmetry is often used to predict a turnaround moments really in people's therapy. If somebody's having psychological treatment for a social anxiety disorder, they use this test to be able to start to predict when the person's going to start feeling better. Now, social anxiety disorder or a social phobia is a persistent and overwhelming fear of social situations, and it's one of the most common anxiety disorders. So it's shyness on steroids, to be honest. It'll be an intense fear and anxiety of the most simple everyday activities, like going shopping, like speaking on the phone. Now, most of us worry to a certain extent about social situations from time to time, but with somebody with social anxiety disorder, this is very, very debilitating illness. They're terrified of doing or saying the wrong thing at any given time, and just feeling incompetent basically, and it's a very disruptive phobia. You know, people can't go to work, they can't go to school, they start to fail at exams. There's a spiral. So when these people are tested on these resting EEG asymmetries, they look at which side of the brain lights up. Now, when they're poorly, the right side of the brain is lit. But as they start to feel better, this light starts to shift and you see a left lighting. So I would hope that mine was light, you know, that I'm confident, outgoing, and I've got a good approach to life. So we start to see this shift on the left. Now, they did an EEG analysis with people. People is an important term, and I'll explain why I said that in a minute, with people, and saw that in every case, when they were smelling lavender, after 3 minutes, the left side of the brain lit up. Now, if you have a cynic or a skeptic, they will always say, oh, placebo effect, or they thought they were going to get better. No. But this is a clever trial, and I wish I'd thought of it, and I hope people think of doing it forever. Amen. They used adults, but they also used newborn babies. So they measured the brain waves, And even with the newborn babies who didn't know how they were supposed to perform, the left side of the brain started to light up. So we can see that this helps reduce anxiety, but also brings about this greater approach to life. Very, very interesting. So this is theory. And in the next video, we're going to look at how we can use it day to day, how you and I can put that into practice. Look at your slides. Interesting slides, I think.